Hi, Michael and Middleton here, borrowing my son's room for this video since it's doing what it does in western Washington and raining like crazy outside right now, and we don't have very good lighting in our room. So I'm going to continue on reading from my allegorical fiction novel, The Great Deep, and again I will give you a few seconds to pause and read the back if this is the first video you're running across of these. Go ahead and get just a general overview from the back of the book. In the description down below this video, I will include the links to where you can find all of my books. I have 20 titles out presently, and as well as the ministry that all of my proceeds go directly to, Youth with the Mission Faith Harvest Helpers. You can check that out. I like to say, get a good read and do a good deed. So there'll be that information in the description. Follow this link to my YouTube page in the Good Books playlist, and find the first 5 chapters of this book to listen to before this one, if it's the first one you're running across, unless you just want to do a random sampling. So I'll start with chapter 6 now. William tried to get back to sleep, but found this to be a hopeless task. He tossed and turned for about an hour. Several times he nearly dozed off, but disturbing thoughts and questions jolted him awake again each time. Abandoning his hope of sleep, he sat up in bed, braced his elbows on the windowsill, and stared out into the darkness. He found it impossible to sleep with so many unanswered questions flooding his mind. He had never been able to sleep well when he was aware of any unresolved issue. It was more than just still being upset about the move. It was more than just the damage done to his ego at the pond that day. Deep inside, what William did not want to admit to himself was that he was afraid. Afraid of what? He did not know. Perhaps that was it, afraid of the unknown. There were so many new things happening in his life, in his mind, in his spirit. Most of the time he was uncomfortable, physically. Growing pains, he had heard it called. He didn't know how to define it. It was largely an intangible thing. All he knew was that much of the time he had more physical energy than he knew what to do with. And he felt like, a snake trying to shed its skin. It just felt like he was squeezed inside too small of a package. And most of the time, his body outpaced his brain. He'd become quite accident-prone. His mind was in turmoil as well. He was having new thoughts and new emotions. He found himself losing interest in what had been some of his favorite pursuits and gaining, new interests. At times, William felt as if he were older than his actual 12 years. There were also other times when he felt younger. He struggled to understand his identity. A few weeks before, his father had tried to give him the talk, but William had blown him off. At the time, he had been just too disturbed and distracted by the upcoming move. And how can you talk about what you can't put into words anyway, he thought. William was also, for the first time, beginning to have questions about his spiritual life. Up to this point, it was something that he pretty much took for granted. His parents had always taken him to church. It was just normal, and he had never before questioned whether or not he wanted to be there. He had gone to church camp in the summer and Wednesday night youth group and to be with his friends. But shouldn't there be more to it? God has no grandchildren, he had once heard the pastor say. His parents seemed to have something that he knew he hadn't yet laid hold of. William was beginning to realize that there was a difference between knowing about God and actually knowing Him. With all of this swimming through his mind, William again drifted into that surreal netherworld between waking and sleep. With his eyes mostly closed, his head drifted inexorably towards the windowsill. The side of his head had nearly come to rest on the smooth, cool surface when a brilliant flash of light woke him with a start. Far off to his right, just within his view, there appeared a shaft, a pillar of light. Whiter, purer, and more radiant than lightning, it had appeared for no more than an instant. Or had it been an hour? William did not know. It was as if all of time and eternity could have been contained in that one moment. For that moment, or however long it was, time seemed to simply not be. And that light, that horrible, wonderful light, it was totally unlike anything William had ever seen. Yet somehow, in some manner he could not comprehend, and would have found impossible to describe, it was familiar. A pure radiance, fluid, shimmering and pulsating with life. It had seemed to erupt from the ground with a benevolent violence, like a power capable of destroying all, yet possessing no desire or intent to do so. Familiar. Yes, it was somehow familiar. It was as if he were remembering something that he had just seen for the first time. How could something that had appeared for such a brief instant flood his consciousness in such vivid measures? He was both frightened and fascinated. That was out near the blowhole, he thought. William spent the following hour or so straining to catch another glimpse of whatever it had been. He threw open his window and scanned the pre-dawn landscape, leaning out as far as he could without falling into the bushes below. But the world had seemed to return to normalcy. By the time that the golden-orange sun launched its first direct rays over the horizon, William had convinced himself that it had been a dream. A waking dream, perhaps, but a dream. But what about... No, just a dream. Despite his state of physical and mental exhaustion, William decided to go ahead and get up for the day. I'll try to take a nap later on, he thought. He hoped that he could occupy himself sufficiently over the coming hours to crowd the night's strange happenings out of his mind. Then I can get some rest. He still hadn't recovered from the 4 days on the road, and being awakened in the middle of the night 2 nights in a row had only served to amplify his state of fatigue. William yawned hard, stretching his arms high over his head. He pulled his window closed and latched it. He climbed down off the bed and walked over to the bathroom, stumbling over his shoes on the way. He would have fallen, but caught himself on the door frame leading into the bathroom. Bracing himself, he waggled his head, attempting to wake himself a bit more. But this only made him dizzy. Whoa, not a good idea. After nearly falling asleep in the shower, William brushed his teeth and got dressed for the day. He decided to wear the shoes that he had stumbled over instead of his boots, which were still a little damp. Before leaving his bedroom, he retrieved his pocket knife from the top of the dresser. He dropped it into his pocket and headed for the kitchen, eager for breakfast. As William passed through the main room on his way to the kitchen, he could hear the tack, 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 ding of his mother's typewriter as she worked upstairs. My, she's got an early start today, he thought. I wonder what she's working on. William's father and grandmother were standing in the kitchen drinking coffee and talking when he walked in. He wasn't surprised to see his grandmother there. She was an early riser like him. However, it surprised William to see his dad up. Jacob took a sip of coffee as he turned to William. He swallowed and greeted him. Hey, good morning, son. Hey, Pop, William replied. What's Mom working on so early? Oh, she's writing some sort of history article for the State Board of Tourism, Jacob began. I can't believe she landed a job writing for the state, when we don't even officially live here yet. But why so early, William asked. Beats me, Jacob began. I guess she just really was jazzed to land her first assignment so soon after moving here. She might end up doing some stuff for the college, too. Speaking of which, he continued, I've got to get going. Jacob took one final sip of coffee, set his cup in the sink, and headed for the front door. I've got a little paperwork to do at the college today and was going to go ahead and set up my office, as long as I have to go in anyway. Pointing to a large cardboard box on the dining room table, he asked, Could you carry that stuff out to the car for me? Oh, yeah, sure, William replied. He picked up the box and followed Jacob through the front door and out to the car. "I should be home by late afternoon," Jacob said. "Thanks for your help. I'll bring you a treat from town." William set the box in the back seat next to a few others and asked, "How about some jerky, the spicy kind?" "Okay, sure. I'll stop at a gas station on the way back. See you later, son." Jacob opened the front door, slid in behind the steering wheel, and turned the key. As the engine started, he slammed the door, put the car in gear, and began backing up. William waved as his father pulled away. He took a deep breath, stretched, and soaked in the beautiful morning. Still eager for breakfast, he didn't linger long before he turned around and headed back for the kitchen. "Scrambled or over easy?" Mary asked as he entered the kitchen again. "How about an omelet?" William inquired. "I saw a green pepper in the refrigerator last night. Do you have any ham?" "Sure, boy," Mary replied. "You want some cheese on that?" "Yeah, that'd be great, Grandma. You're swell," he concluded. William poured himself a glass of juice. Collecting a spoon and fork from the dish drainer, he sat down at the small wooden table in front of the window with the blue curtains. As Mary prepared his breakfast, he sipped the juice and paged through a couple of Reader's Digests that lay on the table. Feeling a little bit too warm, he slid the window open a bit. A sudden gust of wind billowed the curtains, catching Mary's attention. Smells like rain," she commented as she retrieved 3 eggs and a gallon of milk from the refrigerator. She cracked the eggs into a glass mixing bowl and added a little milk. She retrieved a wire whisk from a drawer nearby and beat the mixture into a light froth. She then added a little bit of baking soda and beat the eggs a few more strokes. "Makes them fluffier," she explained. After setting her cutting board down on the counter next to the sink, she pulled a green pepper, a slice of ham, and a block of cheddar cheese from the refrigerator. She finally diced about a quarter of the green pepper and grated about a cup's worth of cheese. She then diced the ham. With all of her ingredients prepared, she placed a large cast iron griddle on the stove, turning on 2 burners that it covered. She proceeded to make William's omelet and a couple of slices of toast for him as well. "That fancy enough for you, city boy?" she asked as she placed the food before him. "You like Tabasco, right?" she continued as she set the small bottle of pepper sauce in front of his plate. "Oh, definitely," William replied. "Thanks, Grandma." He applied a generous sprinkling of the spicy red condiment to the feast before him and began the happy task of devouring it with gusto. After William finished eating, he cleared his place at the table, setting the dishes in the sink. He then collected a couple of empty egg crates from the utility room and headed out for the chicken coop. On the way, he stopped at the garden shed. He filled a coffee can there with the chicken feed and continued on his way. He had now learned to scatter the feed first before collecting the eggs. This way, the hens would vacate their nests to feed, leaving the eggs readily accessible. He could then easily collect them without getting his hands pecked by the hens. William walked through the gate, latched it closed behind him. He scattered the chicken feed, doing his best to keep it from falling in front of the door leading to the coop. This way his path wouldn't be obscured by the feeding hens. He made his rounds to each nest, completely filling both egg crates, with 3 extra eggs besides. "Great, how do I get these back to the house?" he thought. After a little deliberation, he fit 2 eggs in his shirt pocket and 1 in his left front pants pocket. His knife was in his right pocket. He left the coop, returned the coffee can to the garden shed, and walked, very carefully, back to the house. William's grandmother met him as he entered the utility room. "Hey there, boy. You fill both those crates?" "Sure enough," he replied, "even a few extras." He handed Mary 2 full egg crates and carefully removed the extra eggs from his pockets. "See?" "Wow, quite a haul. Must have been a full moon last night or something," Mary replied. William had no idea what bearing a full moon could possibly have upon how many eggs the hens laid, but agreed anyway. "Well, yeah, I guess." "Well, it looks to me like we're just about ready to sell some eggs," Mary continued, as she opened the refrigerator where the eggs were kept. "We got plenty now for the kitchen. Let's see, 8 dozen if we take all but today's 2 full crates. Why don't we store these and pack the rest out to the wagon?" She set the eggs in the refrigerator and used the extra William had carried in his pocket to fill the empty spaces in the other crates. She and William then carefully placed the other eggs into a cardboard box. Why don't you carry these out to the wagon, Mary began. It's not that heavy, but if I had one of my fainting spells, well, let's just say it's harder to sell these eggs already scrambled. Most of the time, Mary kept her wagon parked outside the horse barn. William walked out the utility room door carrying the box of eggs and turned left. Mary grabbed her wide-brimmed hat and followed. William loaded the eggs into the wagon directly behind the seat. He then helped to hitch Chester, the horse, to the wagon, and they were off. They spent the next few hours leisurely traveling to the half-dozen or so neighboring homes, which comprised what Mary jokingly referred to as the suburbs of Rock Springs. At each stop, Mary waited on the wagon while William made his sales pitch. Of course, being a cordial small-town area, they were always invited in for a visit. This is why it took so long to complete the route. William didn't mind too much, though. It was his first chance to get to know the area a little. And besides, he managed to sell all 8 dozen eggs. He got quite a few cookies out of the deal as well. Another added bonus was that Sharon Stewart hadn't been at home when they came to her house. He did his best to hold back a vengeful grin as her mother apologetically explained that Sharon was at the dentist. William hadn't cared to make public their meeting at the pond, so no one was aware that they had met. William and his grandmother arrived home just in time for a late lunch. After unhitching Chester from the wagon, Mary turned him loose to graze in the pasture. She and William then returned to the house together. William wasn't very hungry, as he had fairly much stuffed himself with cookies on the long egg run that day. He did, however, manage to eat a bowl of soup and most of an egg salad sandwich for lunch. As they cleaned up, he and Mary discussed what he wanted to do with the money he'd collected for the eggs. Pausing in mid-sentence, Mary heard his dad coming in the front door and bounded out to greet him. "Hi, Dad. You're back early," he said. "Well, hey there, sport," Jacob replied. "Yeah, it didn't take as long as I thought it would. Is your mother around?" "She's still typing away upstairs," William replied. Jacob began walking towards the staircase. He paused and called back to William, "Oh, say, I got your jerky. It's out on the dashboard." "Did you get the spicy kind?" William pressed. "Yes, sir," Jacob replied. "This stuff's sprinkled with crushed red peppers. Ought to be a match for your iron stomach." William felt himself salivating as he made a beeline for the family car. He retrieved the plastic jumbo pack of jerky from the dashboard and exclaimed, "All right." Took his pocket knife from his pocket and sliced open the top of the bag. William removed a piece and sunk his canine teeth into it. "Oh, Dad," William began as Jacob stepped back out onto the porch through the front door of the house. "I was going to check out the fort today, okay?" "Sure," Jacob replied. "Just remember what I told you about being careful climbing over those loose rocks." "I kind of wanted to ride my bike out there," William continued. "Well, there's a trail that goes most of the way there," Jacob interjected. He pointed out the bare dirt path leading up the distance to the hill and continued. "There's cactus here and there in the field, so if you don't want to shred your bike tires, stay on the path. You can go on foot when it ends." "Cactus, yeah, I know about cactus," William thought. "Okay, Dad, thanks." "Oh, and be sure to be home before dark," Jacob concluded. William retrieved his bicycle from where he had parked it on the side of the house. He filled his water bottle from a hose bib and tucked what was left of the jerky into the small cargo pouch hanging underneath the back of the seat. Noticing that the back tire was a little low, he withdrew a compact tire pump from the pouch and inflated it a bit more. He pressed on the tire with his thumb and, satisfied, returned the pump to its place. He then walked his bike to the gate built into the barbed wire fence, which was close to where the bike trail leading to the fort began. He made a mental note to remember the location of this gate the next time he went fishing. He knew that he'd only been lucky when he crossed the fence the hard way before. William opened the gate, walked his bicycle through, and latched the gate behind him. Although there were large rocks scattered here and there, the trail was fairly smooth. It only took William a few minutes to get to the top of the hill. The trail got rougher and a bit windier on the far side of the hill, Being only a recent convert to country life, he was used to flat, smooth, wide streets. He decided to play it safe and walk his bike to the bottom of the hill. Soon after he reached the bottom, the trail tapered off, so he left his bike and continued on foot. William looked around, attempting to locate the opening to the cave. Here and there he saw a few old soda cans. Most of these were riddled with small circular holes. He picked up one and shook it, generating a loud rattling sound. Curious, he turned it upside down. Several small copper-colored spheres tumbled into his cupped hand. Now I know what I want to save my egg money for, he thought. He continued to search for the cave opening. He found a hubcap and an old cap gun, but no cave. He continued searching and stumbled upon a rock-lined fire pit. No cave. An arrow lay at the base of the hill. Cool, but still no cave. William was beginning to get really frustrated, but just as he stepped around a large clump of brush jutting out from the base of the hill, there it was. In fact, he nearly fell into it. Based on his father's description, he'd expected to find a great gaping maw like something you'd build a bridge across. Instead, what he saw was something more akin to a decent-sized mud puddle. A hole about 6 feet wide ran down about 15 feet along the base of the hill. Ah, nuts! William suddenly realized that he hadn't thought to bring a flashlight. He thought for a moment and decided that there would probably be enough daylight filtering into the cave to at least get a quick look around. He began to pick his way over the large, loose rocks leading down into the earth. After he cleared the entrance by several feet, he paused, allowing his eyes a chance to adjust to the growing dimness. It seemed to William that the cave went back farther than his dad recalled, but he could see that it tapered off to a crack in the back left corner, which was certainly too narrow to squeeze through. He briefly thought of attempting it, but was dissuaded by the horrifying thought of getting stuck somewhere along the way, swallowed up by the earth. To his right, he could see the old couch his dad had told him about. Poised where he was, he could not believe that he had hauled it all the way down into the cave and then over the rocks to the bottom. He guessed that they must have used a flatbed cart or something to haul it from the house to the cave, and then were simply stubborn enough to finish the task. Several folding chairs and a card table stood near the couch. A jar sitting on top of the table caught his attention. He continued down into the cave and walked over to the table. Sealed inside the jar were several candles and 3 pocket-sized boxes of wooden matches. Hey, that'll work, William thought. With a little effort, he unscrewed the lid from the jar. He then dumped the contents out onto the table. He looked around a bit and found a discarded soda bottle. Using his knife, William shaved one end of the candle until it was small enough to be wedged snugly into the mouth of the soda bottle. He stood his makeshift candelabra on the table and lit it. This task required several attempts due to the age of both the candle and the matches, but was finally accomplished. The dimness of the cave suddenly took on a warmer glow, almost homey in a masculine sort of way. He then proceeded to look around the cave. It was fairly unspectacular as far as caves went. William and his family had once toured Cave of the Winds while on vacation in Colorado. He had been awed by the beautiful and intricate formations and the enormous caverns. The tour guide had even pointed out a formation that looked like a king-size slab of bacon. There were no such formations in the fort. There were cracks and crevices here and there, but it was mostly just ordinary rock that made up the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. It was astoundingly ordinary. Only the mystery of what lay beyond the open crevice in the back corner kept hold of William's preteen attention span. He retrieved the candle from the table and walked back to the crevice. He lifted the candle high over his head in an attempt to throw light a little deeper into the chasm. In the dim and flickering light, it was difficult to be sure, but it looked like it widened out a bit, not too far back. William noted that the closer he held the candle to the crevice, the more it flickered. A breeze, he thought. Airflow. I guess Grandma was right. This must connect to the blowhole somehow. He decided to try and make an echo. If I yell real loud and it echoes, he thought, then I'll know it gets pretty deep not too far back. He pressed up close to the widest part of the crack and yelled loudly, "Hello!" Quickly he turned his head so that his ear was right up to the crack. He listened hard. After a few seconds of silence, he heard, something very faint. He decided to try again and yelled even louder, "Hello!" He turned his ear to the crack again. He heard no echo, but music? Like in that place between waking and sleep, he thought, but was not quite sure that he heard music. He recalled one of his cousins who lived in Nebraska telling him about ghost bells. How that on very calm days you could sometimes hear the faint sound of bells like great wind chimes. This despite being miles and miles out in the country and far from any house. His cousin's dad liked to say that if you listen hard enough, you can hear the angels. That was his explanation for this mystery. But this sound was different. It wasn't like a bell. It was more like singing. Too faint, too distant to make out any words. It still definitely resembled the sound of a voice. Or many voices, perhaps. Confused, William stepped back. He looked around and found a fist-sized rock. He tapped on the wall like someone trying to find a good spot to hang a painting. He struck the wall of the cave harder, working his way along the smooth stone surface. Suddenly, at a spot just to the left of the crack, the sound changed. As he repeatedly struck the same general area, he came to an indisputable conclusion. It's hollow. He struck the wall as hard as he could with the rock. It soon became apparent, however, that he would need to bring in heavy artillery. I can borrow a sledgehammer and come back tomorrow, he thought. I think I saw one out in the tractor barn. Despite his newfound excitement, he now realized how tired he was. He decided to take a little nap before heading back to the house. Carefully noting the location of the hollow-sounding spot, William returned to the couch. He returned the candle to the table and beat the dust from the couch cushions. Plopping himself down onto the couch, he yawned, leaned back, and closed his eyes. It was a loud peal of thunder that woke William from a sound sleep. "Uh-oh," he said aloud. He had no idea how long he had slept, but the candle had burned down to within an inch of the lip of the soda bottle. He left it burning to light his way as he paced across the floor and scampered up the large rocks to the mouth of the cave. It wasn't totally dark yet. William guessed that it was just after sunset. He climbed up out of the cave and walked hurriedly back to his bicycle. He tipped it up and began walking up the hill. By the time he reached the top, it had begun to sprinkle. Rather than risking a collision with one of the large rocks on the trail, he decided to play it safe and walk his bike back home. It was growing rapidly darker, but the flashes of lightning were frequent enough to provide sufficient light to keep him on the trail most of the time. About halfway home, his dad met him with a flashlight. "There you are. I was getting a little worried with the storm coming in." "Oh, thanks, Dad. I fell asleep on the couch," William replied. Jacob chuckled. "You actually sat down on that ratty old thing?" "Well, I was really tired," William explained. "Maybe you should just get to bed a little earlier," Jacob suggested, "even if you are on summer vacation." "I've been going to bed plenty early," William began. "I've just been, waking up a lot at night." "That's not too unusual when you're in a new place," Jacob offered. "Once you settle in a bit more, you'll be fine." When they arrived back at the house, William parked his bicycle in a sheltered spot under the eaves next to the utility room. He retrieved the remainder of his jerky from the cargo pouch and went inside. Dinner was waiting for him on the dining room table. After he ate, William wrote a list of what he wanted to take back to the cave the next day. Sledgehammer, chisel, flashlight, rope, food, maybe some chalk. He set his list on top of the dresser along with his pocket knife. After a quick shower, he changed into his pajamas. He then sat down on his bed to read the first couple of chapters of the book he had picked out the night before. Feeling very sleepy, he turned out his light, lay down, and closed his eyes. Drifting into an uneasy slumber, he hoped that this night would pass uneventfully. And that's the conclusion of Chapter 6.